welcome to the Panther Pad Podcast. I'm General Mike Payne, original Black Panthers of VA, and we have
Lola Truitt, a soldier in the Black Panther Army of Virginia.
Today is a special day. We got a very special episode for you. We have none other than Jade Simmons.
It's a presidential candidate that they're suppressing from everybody.
Right. And, it's going to be a really exciting show, a lot of information. So I urge you to just really pay attention, watch, check it out. And we're going to jump right into it. How about that? We ain't going to hold you up and talk to you forever. We're going to jump right into it. Let's get it. Hello.
Hi.
Hi there. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Thank you.
I'm good. I'm so sorry about the time mix-up on our end. That was our mistake.
Oh, no, it's fine.
It's okay. We're just glad to have you. I'm excited to be speaking with you tonight.
Thank you for having me. This means a lot. We're so appreciative of all of the different independent media personalities, podcast hosts who've made room for us. So thank you for having me.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're really happy. We was excited. We've been thinking about it all week. We're like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good one. This is going to be great.
Let's do it.
So, welcome to the Panther Pad Podcast. And first of all, I guess we'd like you to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's a loaded question these days, right?
Yeah.
The basics. I am a proud wife, mother, business owner. I began my career as an artist. Music is still a huge part of what I do. I'm one of the most sought after professional speakers in the nation. And I have the honor of being one of those rare birds whose job is actually her passion and her purpose. So pianos come with me wherever I go usually, and no matter what I'm speaking on, I'm usually brought in to speak on leadership, transformation. A lot of the big name corporations bring me in to speak on change, how to navigate difficult periods of change. And I usually use music to kind of drive my points home. So you're looking at a person who's now vying, of course, for the highest office in the land. And it's because I really feel our country is in desperate need of a whole new type of leadership. And so the varying things I've been blessed and privileged to do over the years, I feel really lends itself to the type of leadership we need now, one that specializes in a whole new level of communication. Because if we look at the two choices we've been left with, y'all, I mean, in the major parties, communication is not a strong point on either side. And this time is too dangerous to have somebody either instigate us through or fumble us through this time. So I'm leaning heavily on my skills as a communicator, but also my skills as a creative person who comes up with solutions. I'm brought in to find uncommon common ground. And if we ever needed to find common ground in any more divisive time, you let me know. But this feels like, one of those such a time as this season. So I'm proud to lean into a moment like this.
Okay. Now, what is your economic plan for America as a whole? Because I ask this question because, we have to realize running for the presidency, you're going to be the president of all of America, not just Black people, but all of America. So my first question is, what is your economic plan for America as a whole?
Yeah, thank you for asking it in that way. It's funny because we're so used to the power paradigm, mostly of two white men at the top. And nobody ever asked them, okay, now we just trust that their economic plan is for everybody. Nobody ever asked them if they're going to have trouble serving all the other people they don't look like. And what I get excited about is when you look at the history of Black women in this country, we have always been in positions of power. We've always been in places of building infrastructure. The entire economy was built on the babies we birthed for this nation. Don't get me started on that. So when you talk about a plan that we must have, the thing that Americans can look forward to is that when you look at Black women in leadership, our plans have always been inclusive. And so I come to the table proudly serving as a president for all, which is why you see me focus on paradigm shifting. Our economy is no longer a humane economy. So even the very kind of idealistic notions of capitalism aren't even existing right now. We have the most corrupt form of capitalism that's reigning right now. And you're seeing not just Black people, but the majority of Americans be disenfranchised. There's no reason that 0.01% of our population dominates 90% of our wealth as a nation. 90% of the people in this country, that top 0.01, have more wealth than all of them combined. That's ridiculous. That means the disparity now is too huge. You'll see me talking about basic stuff. How about let's raise the minimum wage? $7.25 since 2009. You don't own a car, a house, bread, rice. That's the same price that it was in 2009, yet we're asking people to still make a living on that wage. We're in Texas here. Our minimum wage is the federal level, $7.25 an hour. Yet as a small business owner, I pay $18 an hour minimum wage. Because if I'm building a company on the back of American workers and I'm building my American dream, they should be able to share in that dream. You'll see us holding corporations accountable, the ones that have the biggest disparity between their median wage worker and their CEO. Let's take Walmart, for instance. You work at Walmart, your CEO is making 1,063 times more than you. And you got people who work for billion-dollar company Walmart who live below the poverty line. You can't have that. How do you fix that? You tax, and you also incentivize companies to pay their fair share, not just in taxes, but in wages as well. You'll see me talking a lot about what it would look like. What if we actually demanded something of the companies we're bailing out? What if we actually said, hey, we bailed you out twice now. COVID-19, 2008 recession. How about airlines? You begin to bail us out and have some manufacturing back here in the States and give those jobs to people, prioritize the ones who lost their jobs during COVID-19. For starters, these factory workers that have gone out of business because we've lied and said that our American workers aren't qualified. It's not true. The reason our companies went abroad is because our American workers were overqualified and were actually wanting to be paid what they were worth. So we went abroad to find cheap labor. So we talk about bringing those jobs back for real. Sidebar, the current president ran on that, but in reality, he signs tax bills into law that incentivizes companies to stay abroad. So we've got to be better as Americans to do our research. And I think you asked that question in that way because you know, and I bet we'll get to it later, that I do have plans that specifically focus on Black Americans as well. But as a whole, we're talking about a paradigm shift in the economy that provides more opportunity to access to opportunity, for more Americans than ever before.
Okay, so wow, that's great, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because the minimum wage situation would help a lot of people. I mean, if that really raised up, a lot of people would be in a better position. And we all know when the poverty level goes back up and everything increases and the economy gets better, we know the crime rate goes down. All these things start to fix themselves. So that's really important.
I'm sorry, I wasn't specific. So what I look at, this is why I tell people, stop cowering behind these red and blue party lines.
Right.
These false loyalties that we've been letting be entitled to our vote, and they have not served us powerfully. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. And so I tell people, we've got to, first of all, free our vote from those party lines. Politicians should be up in arms every 2 years wondering what we're going to do. They don't lose sleep over us because they figure they've got us in the bag. Oh, they're Christian. We know they're going to vote red. Oh, they're Black. We know we got them there in the blue. That's our fault. We've done that. So I mentioned that because the minimum wage, mind you, has not been changed since 2009. We've had a Black Democratic president and a Republican president in that time period. So it's not just about switching the color. You now have to switch the entire game, and to have an independent in office means that the mandate of mine is coming from the people. It's not coming from a party. So the minimum wage, I say, upon day one of the executive orders I'd like to sign into law is raising minimum wage immediately to $10, almost an emergency wage. My ultimate goal is $15 by the end of not the first term, the first half of the term. They've been trying to raise minimum wage for over 12 years. Why haven't they done it? Here's the other reason that nobody else is going to say to you if they belong to one party or the other. You're only going to hear Republicans saying this. When you raise the minimum wage, it's difficult for small business owners like myself because it requires us now to pay more with less revenue than the big corporations have. So I believe that when you first raise it, you allow it to be gradually raised for small business owners. They get more time to meet that minimum, but we all have to level up. We can't expect workers to keep working this way and not have their work be worth it.
Right.
Okay, and I had a question to ask you, Ms. Jade Simmons. Now, would you give companies different incentives to hire more people when the minimum wage goes up to where they can afford it? Because one of the reasons when they start talking about raising the minimum wage, you have big corporations talk about, well, we wouldn't be able to give everyone health insurance. We wouldn't be able to afford, the pay increase, because that means managers would have to make twice as much as a minimum wage worker. A lot of businesses were afraid, and then they start hiring less people. Then what they're doing now is going to artificial intelligence, which means they have more machines taking jobs such as the cashiers. You go into restaurants, now you have more computers doing the jobs of our people. Yeah. So they said artificial intelligence is going to take those jobs away. So that's what companies are moving towards, so they don't have to pay as many employees now.
What do you believe when you ask me that question?
What do I believe? I believe they can, they just don't want to.
Okay, I'm just glad we got that on the table.
They don't want to.
As a business owner, there are tough decisions you have to make. When COVID-19 hit, my business is in the world of public engagement. So we didn't get any gradual shutdown. We were shut down overnight. So I went from playing in halls and stadiums that had 15,000 people in them, and you couldn't do that with COVID-19. And so we instantly were shut down. I was instantly faced with the hard decision of what do you do about payroll? And let me tell you what we did here. Yes, our minimum wage is extremely high in comparison to what is required. That's important. But what we did was, as we phased into these pay cuts we had to make, guess who took the first pay cut? Right? Guess who took the largest pay cut? Because since I make more, it's my company, that means most likely I have more in savings, I'm more set up, right, to be able to take the brunt of that. And that's what we did. Was that fun? No, it wasn't fun, but it was rewarding because the people who work for me got to see how much they were truly valued. And to me, we have to enter a season where our leaders, not just the president, prioritizes people over profit. Here's the catch. When you prioritize your people, what you gain in loyalty and commitment and determination, dedication comes back to you tenfold. You see, my people aren't going to go anywhere because they know how much I value them. We as a nation now have to, as corporations as well, have to start showing our people that they are valued. You can't tell me you can't afford to raise the minimum wage when you're paying your CEO 1,000 times more than your minimum wage person. You've got some room. And so what we need to see is some of these CEOs saying, take a little bit off the top here. Some of these VPs saying, take a little bit off the top. Take some of that stock buyback, let's put it back in and invest it into our people. And so there are options. We're just now at a season where we have to ask ourselves, what is it we truly value? And so the artificial intelligence thing, though, is a whole other issue because that's an efficiency issue. That's coming. We can complain about it all we want. It's coming. And we do a disservice to our American workers by not training them to be a part of this technological process. These machines still are going to need operators. They're still going to need people who come in and fix them when they break down because they are that. They are not real. And we're also doing a disservice in our education. That AI question really has to be dealt with our elementary kids now. We're still training them like they are going to school in the 40s and 50s to come out to get factory jobs or to work by rote when we're closing down factories. As we teach them, we should be teaching entrepreneurship. One of the things that I want to do for Black America specifically is to see entrepreneurial charter schools in our communities that are open to not just the students, but the parents, has financial literacy as a part of that. But our kids need to be learning entrepreneurship. Even if they don't open their own business, they need the mindset. You see, the mindset of a producer. That's what we should be raising up now as a people, as an American people culturally, but also for African Americans in general. So two different questions there really. AI is coming, we need to prepare for it. Don't believe the hype about they can't afford it because they can.
So yeah, I would like to get into that as far as a plan to uplift or help the Black impoverished community. What exactly do you have planned for that besides what you stated, or if that's it, that's fine. But yeah, please go in on that.
First thing I want to do is separate Black and impoverished.
Okay.
I want to separate that because I want us to understand, we know this, us talking, we understand this, but the narrative forced down our throats is that Black and impoverished always go together and that's all there is. And so the reason, when that narrative is forced, whenever someone comes forth and proposes plans for the Black community, then the narrative is they're just giving handouts to people who don't want to do nothing. That's what the underlying byline is, which means when you say we are giving bailouts to our corporations, nobody's talking, they don't call those handouts, they don't call it socialism, they don't call it welfare. It could easily fit into any of those descriptions if we wanted to. We choose to call that something different. When we do programs for small business owners, we don't call those reparations, right? So I like to really use vocabulary in a different way because it has been the thing used against us. And so the programs that I propose for Black America, it's called Breakthrough for Black America. And the emphasis is on reinvestment in our communities, and as well as this idea of restitution. And so I break that down into three main areas: economic reform, education, education reform, and law enforcement, reconstruction, criminal justice reform. We started with education because all the news is talking about after George Floyd, of course, is criminal justice, police brutality. That's great. But even if you get all the dirty cops off the street and you still leave us in these schools where our curriculum is backwards, we're not getting the best teachers, we're not getting the funding, you haven't done anything. Even if you fix our schools and we still can't get a loan for our businesses, we still can't get capital, you haven't done anything. So you'll see Operation Restoration 2020.com. I think you can also get there, Jade Simmons 2020.com. You'll see a whole section called Breakthrough, Shades of Breakthrough. And there you'll find Breakthrough for Black America. I would proudly be a president to all, but I will also be unapologetically a champion for historically underserved communities. And at the top of that list, African Americans. There's no other way to say it. We rank number one on that list. And so what happens now is when you have 400 years of systemic injustices, and it's systemic racism and a systemic heart issue, which is a whole other problem there, you have to spend at least the next 100 or two rebuilding in now what I call systemic success. Let me give you some quick specifics there. In the education aspect, I told you about the entrepreneurial charter schools. We have to restore the way that we teach. Really, it's not restore because it's never been right. We have to reconstruct the way that we teach history in our schools. My father's a civil rights activist. I had the honor of, when we got home from school, we got a whole different lesson in history. So we grew up knowing about the history of Africa, of African Americans. We learned a lot more than slavery and Jim Crow. And that made a big difference in how we saw ourselves and our place in the world. And so that change doesn't just help Black students, helps us as a universe be able to understand ourselves differently. When our white peers in school are understanding that I'm not just a slave, I didn't just emanate here as a slave, and they understand that the same way we learn about the Chinese dynasties, right, and the European kingdoms, they understand that we're on equal footing from Jump Street. That changes everything. When they understand that Egypt, by the way, is Africa, you notice how we've always taken that out and put it over here? Absolutely. It's the same. And we've honored Egypt while dishonoring Africa. So I think that change is long overdue, and I think it'll help teachers as well as students of all race. Economically speaking, we got to look at fully endowing our HBCUs. They put out too much good product for us to allow that to flounder. You'll see me talk a lot about what I call the new Marshall Plan. We went all the way to Western Europe, invested $12 billion back in 48, and we did that under the, I don't want to say guys, we did that under the platform of rebuilding their economy after the devastation of the war. So we should probably invest in our own nation in the same way and rebuild after the devastation of systemic injustice. And so that plan includes some economic incentives to corporations to invest in the Black community that many times, we're keeping a lot of other communities afloat in terms of how we spend our money. And so we need to look now at having those corporations reinvest in our communities. My father fights mostly in the area of gentrification. We're not demanding enough of these corporations and organizations that are coming in out to our communities and then profiting off of being able to exterminate us from those areas and then build up profitable businesses for themselves. So we get into specifics because it's a time where I believe symbolism is not going to be enough. You know, I think we're in danger right now if we re-elect what's currently in office, and even if we elect former Vice President Joe Biden, I don't think we actually move into progress. I think we feel better. You know, it's like you get a nice little blanket and you go, man, I'm glad that nightmare was over. But we actually haven't really fixed the issues that need to be handled. And I can't right now, in my vision, be able to see Biden suddenly being the voice of the change that's needed, or Harris being able to be the voice that we can believe in to take us as a nation, not just as Black people, as a nation forward.
See, I love a lot of what you're saying, all of what you're saying, to be honest. You don't shy away from questions. You answer them so thoroughly, and that's great. I ask questions in a specific way because I like specific answers, and you've given me all of that, and that is great. Especially, I understand from firsthand experience what you're talking about as far as in the school system, because I know when I got a chance to go to world history rather than just U.S. history and learn about the different cultures, it was just, so much more interesting for me. But I actually got to go to a Black history class that was in my high school, and that just blew me away. I learned so much more about myself, about where I actually come from, the culture, and that just really helped. And like you said, not just for the Black children, it helps the white children too, because they sit there and they say, well, wow, I didn't know, it was this or it was that. Also, when we teach classes and we talk about Black history and kings and queens and all these different things, and once I even told the story of Emmett Till, and the white child was really affected by it because he said in school, it was so whitewashed and so, I don't know, watered down, yeah, is a perfect term, that he just thought it wasn't that bad. He didn't think that things like this, so when we really told the story, he was just like, wow, I didn't know. And he was thankful that we, gave him that information. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And yeah, it's really needed. It's really needed.
Yeah. We have been so shocked at how shocked people are that we just speak plainly. And we realize that's because we have, as a people, accepted this double talk. We've accepted the fuzziness, and the reason we have is because we've been convinced and believing it's for our own good. Like, don't worry about the crime bill. Don't worry about that thing he said about not wanting to send his kids to a racial jungle. Don't worry about that for now. Don't worry about the suspected pedophilia. Don't worry. Tara Reid, put her in a closet for now. Don't worry about it, because first thing we got to do is get this man out of office, right? And on the other side, they're doing the same thing. Now, here's something I haven't heard anybody say yet. We talk about President Trump and the crazy stuff that he has done. I think one of the first things I would have to do as president, believe it or not, is figure out how to put more limitations on the president, right? I mean, when's the next time you're going to have a president saying, we got to clean this thing up here? But as you watch him, even with all the philandering, the things that we would have Obama could have never gotten away with, right? He would have never been elected with the same sexual history as the president. But the truth is, he is only able to be in that office and do what he has done because of the door that was open. If you look at a Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton was in there doing what he did, proof in the Oval Office. What did Democrats do? Don't worry about it right now. It's not that bad. Don't judge him for this. Let's just push him through. And we've allowed it on both sides. Whatever you allow on one side, it's going to come back on the other side. We've been telling people who have been making a defense for the racist things that have come out on the right. And I have friends, Republicans, that I love and adore, close friends, family, some of them. And to hear the rationalization, I always say, you can brush this stuff under the carpet now, but how will you feel if the shoe is on the other foot? And that's what people get, this nasty little pendulum that keeps swinging back and forth. The thing we make excuses for will be made as an excuse for our own mistreatment. There's an incredible scripture and Lamentations, and it's talking about the knees no lie, talking about the knees on the necks. And it said there are knees on our necks from our oppressor. And in the context is in the Hebrew Bible. So it's Jews talking about their oppressors. You could put that scripture out right now and you'll think we're talking about George Floyd. And what I realized in that scripture is the key was it said there are knees on our necks. The key is not to think that you couldn't one day be the our. And if every people group imagines themselves as potentially being under a knee, it will change the way you respond when another group is under that knee. Because you understand if we don't do something about what's happening to African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, then we could be next. And so it's an interesting time, I think, for us to finally join together multiculturally. This is the first time we've had international buy-in, right? All these corporations coming out with their symbolic statements of solidarity. Listen, you don't have to believe them. Just call them on their bluff. We need a president now that's going to call everybody on their bluff. Don't just release statements and tell me Black Lives Matter and then work sure the one Black candidate running for president is never heard. CNN, right? Essence, Ebony, Fox, right? So we've got to call people out in this season now and be sure that we're not settling for the symbolism that I believe is running rampant. Somebody, told me, oh, look, they're going to name a street after George Floyd. I said, I bet you George Floyd would rather be here than have a street named after him.
Absolutely.
I'm happy you said that.
Yeah, he'd rather be here. Martin Luther King would be like, take them thousands of streets and monuments and posts down and actually give me equality instead.
Yes.
So we have to push through, and I think you're going to need leadership that's bold enough to say that. I haven't heard Biden say anything like what we're talking about here. And it's because he is in politics as usual. People keep saying, what's it like to be a politician? Or why did you want to become a politician? I said, the last thing I'm trying to become is a politician. I just want to finally be a servant leader to as many people possible. And I feel like we need someone in this season who can speak boldly to these issues, but also can speak in a way that's unifying. The majority of my time, see a piano here, I'm a classical musician. So I'm in rooms with people who don't normally look like me, aren't normally in the same age group, and the corporations I go into are predominantly 80% white men. So I'm comfortable in all these spaces, and it's because they know that when they bring me in, I'm going to say uncomfortable things, but that if they can dare to digest it, it's going to revolutionize the way that their operations function. And that's what we need. We don't need someone to cheerlead us through and tell us we're great when we're not. And we also need somebody to pander to us and tell us what we want to hear. We have to know what's really going on and then make the decisions that allow people to progress as much as possible.
I always say stir the pot. If you don't stir the pot, something's going to stick. So you got to keep stirring it.
I was going to ask you a question. How are we going to redo the medical system that we have towards African Americans? Black women have a 284% mortality rate. And that's been going on for years now. How can we change the medical system and how we're treated?
Yeah. I'm going to give an unexpected answer because I've never been asked it the way that you just asked me. When we were creating policies, it's taken us a long time to roll our policies out. And, it's funny to watch what people suspect. We had more Black people who assumed there was no way I could be qualified for what I was doing. But the most of my accusation in the beginning came from African Americans. And what was funny is the thing that we were working on first were policies for African Americans. And what I did was look at the landscape of the policies that were being presented and try to figure out why they were being resisted. Medicare for all. What were people really afraid of? Right? Debt-free college. What were people really afraid of? And when you do the research, you'll hear people say things like, people, who might have struggled when they were younger, like I struggled, I made my way, I pulled myself up, I paid for college, they should have to pay for it too. So you're hearing, okay, that's an argument of wanting to know that hard work is still an element. You see, you have to hear things differently. We heard people say, it's not that I don't want people to have medical care, I just know as a doctor, this is the stuff we're dealing with, the paperwork it comes with, the quality of care. Called my friends in Canada where they have Medicare for all basically, and she admitted, yes, we have it, but we don't use it. We pay for our health care because it's better quality. So you gotta do your research to know what's being fed to you and understand what the real problem is. So what that told us is if we're gonna build in any form of free healthcare, I need to make sure that when I offer you free healthcare, it's not subpar healthcare. So now we talk about that in a different way. You just come out with Medicare for all one size here is free. They don't want to work for it. They can't process it. So we have to reframe some things. One of the things we reframe that will answer your question is debt-free education. How do you reposition that controversial topic? I say you prioritize strategic debt-free education and you focus on 3 areas: healthcare, criminal justice reform and law enforcement, and education. Why those 3 areas? Because nobody's going to argue right now that we don't need to be beefed up and backed up in those areas. We needed healthcare workers, nurses especially, desperately before COVID-19. You know how much more we need them now as we go into a 3rd surge? When you have healthcare workers committing suicide right now because they haven't rested from stage 1 and stage 2, and they've been the chaplain and the person given the last rites in these rooms. So we now have opportunity to prioritize healthcare. To answer your question, I want to see more African Americans going into healthcare. Why are we not? Because that debt is crazy. That's why a lot of people aren't going into healthcare. Take away that debt, even if you have it for a limited amount of time, right? The next 15 years. And you allow debt-free education in the areas of healthcare, you're going to get more people of color. Statistics show that when we are treated by healthcare providers that look like us, we are treated better. Right now, we know that Black people face a higher rate of being suspected of not telling the truth when they come to the doctor.
Or exaggerating.
So what if we could have stats now that let us know how many of these COVID-19 deaths where people who came in, had symptoms, weren't believed, and then went home and died?
Yeah.
You see, so we have an incredible period now that we must take powerful advantage of. I haven't said this, I've only said this publicly in one other place. I just came out of quarantine after having COVID-19. And let me tell you, there is so much stuff we have no idea is going on behind the scenes. I had COVID-19. If I wanted to, I could have gotten on a plane. Nobody would have known any better. I was not traced. I was not tracked. Nobody called me to see if I was running rampant in the streets. I went back on my own to get a follow-up test because I'm here with my husband and kids, wanted to make sure I was no longer contagious because I felt better. After about 2 weeks, I felt better, went to get a new test. And I said, she said, what's your symptoms? I said, I'm symptom free, but I already had COVID. I want to make sure I don't have it again. You know what she said? Oh, you don't need to do that. If you're feeling better, you can just, I said, no, I need to get another test. And this was a free site, 24 hours is what was promised. She said, well, the CDC no longer requires the second test. So your insurance company will no longer pay for a second test. You want me to believe that insurance companies are not in cahoots here? I think the insurance companies said, hey, this whole double test and negative thing you're requiring is expensive. Let's drop that. So now CDC doesn't require it. So what that meant is my free test was suddenly $136. And I said, okay, whatever. It was supposed to be free. I said, I'm in line. Let me just do it. I'll do it. And I said, I'm going to get it in 24 hours, right? She said, no, because since it's not a mandatory test, you're going to have to pay a rush fee for that 24 hours. I left there paying $200 for a COVID-19 test. And do you know, after 2 weeks, that test came back positive. Even though I was feeling better, symptom-free, I could have gone right back out in public and possibly reinfected people. Most likely the science says that I was no longer contagious. So when the president has COVID for 2 days and is back out on the streets, I got questions. But my point in that is, imagine who would have been disenfranchised if they didn't have $200 on the spot for that test. How many people are currently spreading the illness because they can't afford to be tested? And that's something that's going to disproportionately affect people of color as well. And so while I wouldn't wish COVID-19 on anyone, I'm thankful for the journey of it because I learned so much about the illness and the system from having to deal with it personally. So again, debt-free education is one way to see more of us in 3 important areas that we know we are treated better when we have better Black lawyers, Black doctors, and Black teachers. That's going to do good for us as a people.
Okay. Now, of course, the topic that always comes up, reparations. How do you feel about it? Do you feel it's owed? And if you do feel that it's also owed, how do you feel it would be distributed? In what form or fashion?
Yeah.
And
I was fine amount.
right. And, yeah, the amount also, I guess. How is that broken up? And you know, do you think that that's something that should be done or should be taken care of? And how would you go about doing that?
So one of the things we did with the Breakthrough for Black America plan is we looked at a lot of the proposals specifically called reparations. And what I'll say is if you do your homework, you'll see some very familiar things in our proposals. I talk a lot about vocabulary. You heard me say very strategically at the beginning, restitution, reinvestment, reconstruction, and rebuilding. I speak about these things very strategically because I've seen how our own words get used against us and they get used as the excuse to stop the discussion. So while I may not talk about it traditionally, know that I believe our government has a debt to Black America. That debt started, as I said, back in the day when you had Black women in birthing camps, literally birthing the labor force for this nation. Yep. And so you saw people work for free that now need to be repaid. And one of the ways that I've done that is focused on making sure we have long-term solutions. My problem with a simple paycheck is I know how paychecks work. When I pay you, I'm gonna need you to get out my face. Don't come back and talk to me about discrimination. Don't tell me there's still bias where you are. Once I hand you this check, I don't want to hear anymore. And I know that the check by itself is not going to do what it's supposed to do. Before any money is paid out, we have to have financial literacy as well in place. And I want to make sure that we have structures on the ground that are ready to receive the outpouring that I do believe is due to us. You'll see me building a lot of this repayment into long-term programs that allow sustainable success. So I think about one of the amounts that I saw, which was close to 240,000 maybe. Another amount I saw amounted to something about $30,000 annually for a limited amount of time. Here's the problem. Let's say I wanted to now send my kids to school from that check. I went to Northwestern. It was $28,000 a year when I was there back in 2000, 2001, and that was so expensive back then. Northwestern is now $48,000 a year. If I wanted to send both of my kids to my alma mater for all 4 years, that check wouldn't cut it. So what I need to know is that whatever we build has long-term viability to it. So we don't have any program and anything that we've mentioned that talks about cutting a check. What we look to do is build in systemic success. So again, I don't speak about it in the same way. I'm strategic in how I do talk about it because I want the discussion to actually lead into progress and action. But I wouldn't have a problem as a president considering many of the forms that are out there. And I think you need a president at the top who will make sure the discussion happens and doesn't just stay a nice little talking point come every 4 years. Is that clear?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Another question, I love that you said that. You can't really put a dollar sign on the amount of what we have invested in this country. We're talking about free labor. You just said everything that I want to ask, you already answered. But do you know that our ancestors also built a lot of these colleges that are now white owned? So we already paid for these colleges 3 times over.
That's good.
So maybe some of these colleges should just let some of these children in our communities go there free. If they test high enough to go, let them go.
You know, we do something like that for Native Americans. You know, what we also do is we also paid reparations to the Japanese.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We also paid reparations to some Alaskans. And we watched the Jews be paid reparations. And so it's baffling to me that that word stirs up so much controversy. I'll tell you why it does. It's because of the sheer number of African Americans, or if you want to look at ADOS, right? So it's like we literally had a woman. I think she was a little tipsy, but she came up to us and wanted to talk about reparations, and she was giving us some suggestions. A middle-aged white woman, and she was giving us some suggestions of how we should go after it. And she was talking about really making like an employee claim. And she was saying, because I made an employee claim on something and I got back pay for this, that, and that. And I just listened just to the irony of it all. But one of the things she said is, she said, the problem with reparations is it's just too much money. It's just too much money. And then COVID-19 hit. And in 7 days, we had a stimulus package that was pretty expensive.
They can afford it, but they don't want to pay us.
So here's the thing. Here's truth. You know how they say you can afford something and you can pay for something. We can't afford it. Listen, we can't afford nothing we're doing. We are $27 trillion in debt. Afford went out the window long time ago. We can pay for it though, because we print our money whenever we printed money. Literally for the stimulus, that money was not, there's no bank account of America, right? There's no savings account. We printed that money. The question is, when do we feel it necessary to turn on the printing press? And we have discriminated on when we press that print button. So it's not about, we already know we can't afford most of what we're doing. If China really wanted to become the world superpower, which is their goal, by the way, we should have our eyes on them. All they have to do is call in our debt. If China really wanted to get tough, they would just go, guess what? Pay up right now, right? And then we're in trouble. So the people who argue about expenses in general have a leg to stand on, because it's a national security threat to be in as much debt as we're in. But since we're piling on the debt, we may as well reinvest in the areas that would pay off for us. I think one of you mentioned it earlier. You reinvest in the Black community, you're going to see an increase in the GDP overall.
Yeah.
Right? $13 trillion, I think, has been attached to what racism has cost the Black community. When you invest specifically, now not just minority owned, that's a nice phrase, and you do need minority owned stuff, but you need stuff specifically directed towards Black businesses,
right. Yeah,
as Black home ownership. You got to get specific. Because as that very generous, wonderful term of minority owned, we know that the majority of minority owned grants go to white women, right? Because they are a minority in comparison, right, to the white man, but they are not the disenfranchised minority that these programs were intended for. So now what do? You rectify the situation. We have to get segmented in our responses. And my people who think that that's reverse racism don't understand the history of how these programs have not done what they were supposed to do. So you'll see some specificity. We talk about stuff for minority owned, for small business owners, for Black businesses, because it's a very specific demographic. And so it's that specificity that we need. And I would challenge people who care about that specificity, whatever your people group is, look at others' platforms and see if there is specificity in there. Or are you being generalized to death and into exclusion? And we think that specificity is powerful and important, because racism has been specific. Injustice has been specific. So your countermeasures have to always be specific as well.
Yeah, we understand that totally. We get that a lot. We always speak about, the Asian community, the way they'll do things and they'll hire just their own people and things like that. But when we come and we do that, or we try to stand up for our own people, it's always reverse racism. When, every time we stick up for one another, that's what we get. We hear that all the time. So we definitely understand that. Yeah. The question I want to ask you, and I would love your opinion on it as well. People with felonies, right? When they come out of the prison system and they're not on papers anymore, they're just out of the prison system and they have this felony, I feel that they should have their rights restored. And what I mean by that is they should be able to, I know some places they can vote, but they all places, I mean, you're back in society, you supposedly have paid your debt to society. You should be able to vote. You should be able to also protect yourself. If you didn't go in for, something maybe like murder or whatever like that, but you should be able to own a gun and things. Also, I noticed that they get jobs, but they get paid lower, because it's almost like, well, you need to just be happy we hired you. And it just makes it harder for them to integrate back into society. So I would like to know if you have any type of plan or anything in place that would help them get back into society and maybe just, hide that felony, not hide it, but just, to where they don't have to go out there and live in fear with that felony, to where it makes it harder for them to integrate back into society.
You did your time. You should not be ostracized from society and continuously punished for the rest of your life.
So people watching this are going to think that we were in cahoots, that we had a script before we got on here. You just basically read our criminal justice reform policy. We call it a road to redemption. So what we're requiring of America is to be what it says it is, right? This is a land of opportunity. If you want us to be productive members of society, then why would you put barriers in the way of that productivity? If voting is such a privilege, why would you block it? We met felons ex-felons, when we were out on the road, and they would say, "Oh, I can't sign for you. I'm a felon. I was a felon." And it's funny because felons will tell you they were felons. They don't have no problem. Just I had never met that many felons in my life. I'm like, oh, okay, you a felon, you a felon. But what was wild were none of them fit the stereotype. None of them fit the stereotypes what we think a felon looks like. Nobody made me feel in danger, right? They were just people out and about. But the one thing they knew is what they couldn't do.
Right.
And that bothered me because in many of the states, here's the thing, they could vote and didn't know. We had to tell them, oh no, in this state, you're good. You can sign. And we would say, are you off papers? Which I didn't even know that phrase a couple years ago. I know it now. Are you off papers? And they'd be like, yes. And I'm like, you're good to go. And then others would say, I thought I could vote and I went last time and they told me I had to go to a different precinct, and they got shuffled all over and got frustrated and didn't vote. We focus on that because our specific programs start from a place of this. Everyone at the core is human. How do you serve each human in the situation they're in? So we don't look at people as felons. We look at them as humans first in this situation. Now, whole different discussion, right? For people with violent crimes on their record, that's a different, you have to deal with that a different way. But when you look at the majority of the incarcerated, they've done their time. Some of the things we look to reform or we look to specialize in is really being able to deal with employment discrimination, where formerly incarcerated are concerned. We take a pro-family approach. So we see men, I know women are included and often not included in this conversation enough, but we released a platform as well called Breakthrough for boys, men, and fathers, because nobody talks about the guys, right? Nobody talks about you guys. It's all women's rights all day long, right? So we wanted to be counter to that and talk about the rights of men as well. And we see a big disparity in the way that men are imprisoned. 60% more men are given much larger sentences, longer sentences for similar crimes to what women commit. And so we talked about how do you build in redemption so that their road back to society is smoother and easier. Talking about the right to vote is definitely a part of that, but we focus on that employment aspect. And on the front end, we want to reform, get rid of the cash bail system. That has to go, because you can't tie profit and justice together. That'll never work. If my job is to fill these prison beds, I'm always going to be sending lobbyists to make sure we got ways to keep people in these beds. So you can't tie justice and profit together. We also talk about eliminating private prisons there because of that reason. I'm telling you, it's like y'all wrote the platforms, right? It's like y'all wrote them for us. It's in there. What you can do is, we wanted to be short and sweet with our policy. When you go to jadesimmons2020.com, we have a top 20 platforms. So we do more than that 20, but we focus on the 20 things that we wanted people to know. And it's bite-sized. Here's where we stand. Boom, 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 boom. So you could see it. We have criminal justice reform on there, law enforcement reconstruction on there, and breakthrough for boys, men, and fathers. And we talk about it again in a way that nobody else has. And the good thing about doing criminal justice reform is that affects everyone.
Right.
It's not just Black people in prison. It affects everyone. Yes. It just so happens we're incarcerated at the largest numbers. And so it will disproportionately, positively affect us to have these things instituted. But our brown brothers and our white brothers and sisters too will benefit, and families, we believe, will be strengthened from criminal justice reform. So we're excited. I'll probably be the president that spends more time in jails than any other president, because I love the story of transformation. And if I have a great fault, it is probably believing maybe more in people than they do in themselves at some point. But I think that's a good fault to have as a leader, to be able to see way into the future about what people can be. And so you can't have that many people, you know, in our jails and not believe there's not some good resources in there that as a nation we could benefit from if only we help them, the ones who have paid their time and are ready to do right. I think that's a powerful move that we can make.
Right. Well, that's about all of our time. I'm sorry. I would love to talk to you forever. First of all, we would love to just really thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for doing everything you're doing. These questions we had, we literally, she had some questions, I had some questions, and we were like, okay, we got to make sure we're not asking the same questions. Definitely not scripted. This is stuff we just, we speak about a lot of different things in the community, and it's refreshing to hear someone that's on board with a lot of that, and that's just for making this a better place, and that's really down for the cause to improve the livelihoods of everybody. So we appreciate you, and we thank you so very much.
Listen, we one of the things we didn't expect was such a mainstream media shutout. I mean, we've really been directly refused from media, which we know is controlled by these two political parties. So it's been hard out here for an independent, but we just think that was the only way to do it. So for once, people could go to bed at night not having to wonder whose side their president was on. That was important to us. And so it's been an honor as well to be embraced by young Black leaders like yourself. That the original welcoming mat we expected was not there from our own community. And when it did start coming, it came from you. The people like you who were just like, listen, we're done with the politics as usual. We see through it. We want something new. And so I'm just proud that this is the demographic. One of the things that I felt like God said to me in my prayers was, stop looking for whoever you think your people are, because you don't know who your people are. He's like, I got people lined up for you. And that has been answered prayer. It's like our people have not necessarily looked like what we thought, but we're so proud to have people like you making a space for us. And I'll say, listen, I forgot the name of the podcast. I can't remember.
Podcast.
Looking all militant. It's good. I love it. I think I don't believe in coincidence. So this feels good. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm appreciative and so grateful for the respect that you have shown me, as well as the enthusiasm and daring to ask me hard questions. That's been important. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you. I appreciate you, and you have enjoy the rest of your evening. I guess. Yeah. What time is it? Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we thank you once again. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night.
All right. You too.
Bye.
All right. That's a great show we just had. Jade Simmons. Go out. Vote for her.
She was amazing. Every question that I was going to ask, she answered. She really paid attention to everything that Black people have been talking about forever. She has a plan, an idea of how she's going to implement it all. Get out and vote for Jade Simmons.
Yes, subscribe. We'll be back next Friday at 7 o'clock.
And don't forget to share our podcast.
There you go.
All power to the people.